All right, committee, welcome to Education K-12 budget. And I'll begin by opening our meeting with requests for bill introductions. Do we have any bill introductions from our committee members? All right, no bill introductions. We'll begin with the informational briefing on social emotional learning. Today, we have Kent Reed from the School Counseling Consultant, Kansas State Department of Education, that will be providing an overview. Welcome, Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee, for giving me the opportunity to provide you a little snapshot of what we're doing with social emotional learning. And I think Holly is going to pull up the PowerPoint. We'll go through it fairly quickly. I think we were given 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, Holly, can you go to slide 2? And some of this is going to be review for many of you. That's the mission or the vision of the State Board, that we would lead the world in the success of each student. Slide 3, social emotional learning is one of our State Board goals. Slide 4 states the purpose of social emotional learning. Each student develops the social, emotional, and character competencies that promote learning and success in life. Slide 5 and 6 you're probably familiar with. They summarize the data that was collected through the community conversations. Not once, but twice. First in 2016, and then just recently with the listening tour in 2021. Slide 7 is just one example of numerous studies that have taken a look at the impact of social emotional learning. And it's the Durlock meta-analysis. Actually, it's been done twice. Those are competencies, those are things that can improve if social emotional learning is embedded within the curriculum. And also, I would mention the Kansas Chamber of Commerce survey that has been provided to you, and if not, then we can get that for you. But social emotional skills are the skills that the Chamber survey said they wanted us to address. And really what we call that are employability skills. Slide 8 is a study from Columbia Teachers College University. And for every dollar invested in social skill instruction, there's an $11 return economically to the community. And you might wonder, well, how does that happen? Well, there will be fewer discipline referrals. There will be fewer mental health referrals. There will be fewer juvenile justice referrals. And there will be a greater rate of post-secondary and career placement. And that's what Columbia University found in their study. Slide 9. This is the purpose of our social emotional character development standards. Slide 10 is a look at the standards. There are 3: social development, personal development, and character development. And I want to visit a little bit about the character development. You see underneath there are core principles. School districts develop their own competencies and their own standards to which they would, they think they need to address. But we tell them that it must include those statutes that have been legislated. For example, the Flat Act. They must include that in their social emotional learning curriculum. They must include the bullying statute. And they also must include mandated reporting. So that's what we mean when we say core principles. It's what the local district and the local patrons decide is important to teach in terms of social emotional learning, and then what is legislated. Okay. Slide 11 is just a kind of quick look at what the standards look like, but I did include this because in 2018 the State Board revised them. And in those revisions, we addressed the prevention statutes that I just mentioned, the Flat Act, as well as the bullying prevention statutes. And we took what Kansas businesses have been telling us, and the chamber survey told us, and included employability in the standards. We included school mental health, civic engagement, and mandated reporting. Okay, slide 12 and 13 represents an example, a model. It's called the Kansas Competency Framework, and again, we've moved more towards student competencies rather than just a larger standards framework. And if you will look on slide 13, we've given you an example of a scope and sequence of how to implement the competency framework. And those 6 competencies at the top of the chart, beginning with self-regulation and self-efficacy, those are the competencies that Kansas told us they wanted us to address through the listening tours, and those are the competencies that the Kansas Chamber of Commerce told us they found as a result of their survey. Now, this is how we're addressing the KISA foundational structures. And just as a reminder, the KISA foundational structures, our accreditation structures, include, but they're not limited to, civic and social engagement, business and commerce, the ROSE capacities, which would be physical and mental health, and then post-secondary and career preparation. Slide 14. Okay. Slide 14 comes from a coalition that we have with about 8 different states. And the goal is to figure out a way to essentially teach employability K-12, or what we call workforce development. And workforce development is a very important part of social emotional learning, because we want kids to graduate to have the skill set necessary to succeed in career and post-secondary preparation. And that gives you an example of what a scope and sequence would look like all the way from kindergarten through their senior year. That's slide 14. Slide 15 is the guidance that we provide for measuring social emotional learning locally. At the state level, we do not collect personal data. We collect aggregate data to help drive decisions and for accountability too. The federal government requires us to collect some things. And you have asked us to collect information on bullying, et cetera. So we do that. But for the most part, and particularly individual social emotional learning data, is done at the local level. And this is the guidance that we provide for districts to understand how to do that. Then, the next slide is actually what we collect at the agency. Attendance, program completers, that would be CTE, but also graduation, bullying incident data, suspensions, expulsions, and emergency safety interventions. And the last slide, thank you for your support and your leadership. If it pleases the chair, I will stand for questions.
All right, thank you very much for your presentation. We will entertain a few questions if committee has any questions. Representative Landwehr.
Okay, so was this emailed to us, and did that come from your staff, or?
Yes, I think that we have, you can look for Holly Brocksterman, and you should have attachments for all of testimony.
Okay, thank you.
And we can resend. Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just real quick, I was looking at this document here. This is the Kansas Communities That Care Student Survey.
Okay.
I remember administering as a teacher something, but it was done on a computer. Is that correct?
Now, the KCTC is online. It's web-based. It used to be paper and pencil.
In the last couple of years, probably.
Right, and what really spurred that on, obviously, was the pandemic. Yeah.
Time, yes, thank you.
And I wanted you to have a copy, but I didn't put it on the computer for you to do because I don't have that ability. But Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could we go back to, I think it was slide 11, please?
Slide 11.
Can you bring that up? Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I want to make sure that's the right one. I don't have them before me. It was one where you had, it's right before the different types of concentrations that you have, and one was named Civic Engagement.
Yes, the 2018 revisions.
Those revisions that we had in there. What type of engagement is civic engagement? Can you describe that for the committee, please?
Well, I wish Nate were here. He would do a better job of it than I. But what we want to do with civic engagement is to get kids involved in their school community and their community at large. You know, whether it's government day, that kind of thing. That's what we have in mind with civic engagement. And I can defer to Brad if you want to add to that.
Brad? Thank you for joining, Brad.
So a few years ago, we started what we call the Civic Advocacy Network. That's where we recognize districts that engage their kids in more than just going and raking leaves. It's finding something in your community that is a cause that as an individual or a group you want to address. You work with your city council, you work with your church, whatever it is in your community, it's to actively get engaged. And we have several programs that school districts will adopt and implement, and that's what is part of that, is trying to get kids to be more civically engaged, not just, hey, I'm going to go rake leaves. Well, that's great, but it's done. That's not learning how to give and be a part of the community.
Yes, sir. Thank you. The reason I ask a question, Madam Chair, is back in December, we did some testimony with some information that we received from USD 259. And in that information for diversity, equity, and accountability down in our school district, as part of their deep equity program, as we heard yesterday, there was training for the teachers to give to the children, talking about political activism, what is the limit of what you can do in class, and inspire your students to go and do it. To your knowledge, is there any opportunity with civic engagement as far as the KSD is concerned, setting the standards for that, where there's incentivization to go out and do political involvement, as we saw in those documents that were posted online with Black Lives Matter rallies and different types of things like that? Oh, yes, it's there.
Not that I'm aware of, but can I defer to Dr. Newens?
If you'd like to add anything, you can. Sure, Brad.
But before he comes, the one thing that did come out of our revisions committee just recently is civic engagement. I think next time that we do revise them, we're going to add in social service learning. Okay.
I think what you're describing is more of a curriculum, which we don't get into the curriculum. We just get into, here's the types of things that we would like to see engaged in your community. But we don't have anything to incentivize or recognize other than we do have a star recognition. If districts engage their kids in certain types of activities within their community, we recognize them, but how they do it, each one of those are locally, so.
Thank you. Madam Chair, if I can have one quick, since we have Brad up.
Sure.
Thank you so much. We've heard from Mr. Reed that a lot of this has been given, as we heard repeatedly, double foot stomp, chamber driven. The chamber wanted this, the chamber wanted this. I guess my biggest question is, do you defer to the chamber if they wanted to have other types of standards, since you don't get involved in curricula? If they wanted other types of standards involved in the public school system, is that something that you would entertain as well?
I would if it's what everybody else was agreeing to and it was supported by research. It was just interesting that as we were doing our tour, the chamber submitted to the commissioner, said, hey, I don't have the email, but hey, this aligns with what we're also hearing from businesses, which is why we included it, because the businesses we heard, it aligns to what the Kansas Chamber also did. So, which is the only reason that we think we both, at this time, it aligns with what we were both hearing.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, committee, we'll take another question. Yes, Representative Hoy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For clarification, the social emotional learning is part of the ROSE capacities. So these requirements by state statute that be a part of the school day for our students. Am I understanding that correctly?
What I tried to articulate, I'm not sure I did it successfully, is that by addressing the competencies, student competencies, we can address the Rose capacities. And if you look at the wheel, you'll see several of those that align with mental health.
Okay, Representative Hoy, did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I just have a follow-up because I know that there have been a lot of questions about, and we heard yesterday testimony about the diversity, equity, and inclusion training program for the teachers in my school district, Shawnee Mission School District, and that is separate than the social emotional learning that goes on in the classroom. For example, the students at the elementary school are going to start the morning, and they start right away in kindergarten. They do units on the red zone, the blue zone, the green zone, and helping students identify their feelings and emotions in the morning. And then they go into mindfulness, which is helping them to address and get in a place to start learning in the day. And so what the social emotional learning would be more of instruction on kind of how to process throughout the day. And then the diversity, equity, inclusion for the teachers is to help recognize that, the red zone is going to look a lot different for certain students. Maybe somebody's, I'm feeling sad because my crayon broke versus I'm feeling sad because I didn't have supper last night. Am I kind of getting the differences between training for teachers and the social emotional learning in the classroom?
Well, I can't comment on the training in Shawnee Mission because I'm not familiar with it, but the state board does obviously encourage diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it is one of the KEYS foundational structures. Holly, can you pull up slide number, the wheel? Okay. And to address your question, Representative, what we suggest to districts is they address the intrapersonal, which would be self-regulation, self-advocacy, the interpersonal, which would be relationships between kids, making sure there's not bullying, empathy, okay? And the neat thing about this model is that it includes the cognitive. And for the academicians in the room, that was one thing that was missing from the original social emotional was, okay, what about the thinking skills? And we've included it in this particular model. Did that help?
All right, we're going to take two more questions. We'll take Representative Huber and then Representative Byers.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and this is for Brad. I know when I came over with others to the state board meeting in November, we kind of had a little bit of discussion even with civics engagement, and I was trying to make clear, and I just hope that you agree and clarify the difference even with social emotional learning and civics engagement versus actual civics education and the standards we have to teach civics and to meet the standards we have, because that's still in statute for our kids to learn and meet our standards in order to graduate from high school right now. And so I just, in this discussion with social emotional learning, I just wanted to make sure that we're still on the same page, that we're talking two different things, even when it comes to civics education and meeting our standards to graduate.
It is, because in the standards, you can understand what it means to be, what civics, what the branch is, but that doesn't mean that you've learned how to be engaged with your community, engaged. So there's one is I have the knowledge, the other is I've got the experience to be able to be engaged and do it.
And just a quick follow-up, I would like to maybe get a little more information on how iCivics is being used. I've looked into that a little bit more, and I have some concerns with that program. I know it's being used to some degree in the state of Kansas, and so if you could get a little more information in regards to that, specifically that iCivics program, I would like to look at that. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Representative Byers, and then I'll close this with a quick question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess the question is for Kent. On slide 16, on the social emotional data that's collected, can you give a little more detail? Is this data generalized percentages from each school district, or are we going into specific names? Obviously, program completers that might be, but just asking what level is that data collected at?
Building level, district level, and then it's aggregated, and then we produce it out for you folks and anyone who wants to read it on our webpage at the state level. There is no personal information collected for our use at all. It's all building or district aggregate data.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I appreciate your presentation. I just wanted to alert the committee that you do have a response testimony from the Department of Health and Environment, and they produced for us a document. It's only from 2016 to 2020 that provides some overall health outcomes for our students in Kansas. But I wanted to relay a few that they put in here. So if you haven't had a chance to look, you can. And also to share with you that the CDC numbers for girls for increased suicide is up 51%. In the state of California alone, it's up 24%, and the number of deaths due to suicides outnumbered the number of deaths due to COVID, and that is 2020 numbers. In the document that you were provided by, let's see, the KDHE, it does say on page 2 that in Kansas, suicide or thoughts of suicide are rates above the national average. So I would note that these social emotional learning standards began in 2012, yet during that time and beyond, the number of suicides has increased. It also notes the Hospital Association Emergency Department visit database for 2016 youth ages 10 to 19. And you can see in that the attempts for self-harm and suicide and other significant factors also have gone up. So just to note, we should be following the data. We should be trying to determine whether or not what we are doing, what we are providing, what our kids are facing, what we are subjecting them to, is this causing or is this adding to the stresses that they may already have. All right, committee, I'd like to turn to the next item on our agenda. You should have a Kansas Communities That Care student survey. So if you would take that out of your folder. What I would like to do is take a few minutes, and I would like Holly to time us to simulate what one of these tests might be like for students. Of course, we do not have the laptop computers available, so you can't click through it that way. But I want you to imagine that you're 12 or 13 years old. Maybe you're 15 years old. I want you to put yourself in that mindset, and I want you to begin to answer these questions. And we're going to go for, let's see, we're going to go for 10 minutes. So I think it would take you a lot longer to actually get through all the questions. And remember, committee, this is only one of the surveys, and many districts will survey multiple times this semester, various links. So let's begin now. If you need a pen, raise your hand. All right, committee, you may put your pens or pencils down. An informal survey right here. Raise your hand if you were able in the 10 minutes provided to get to page 10. Raise your hand. All right, raise your hand if you were able to get to page 15. All right, we have about 4 that were able to get to page 15. Now, we're not going to take the time right now to discuss the survey and how a student might feel taking the survey, or whether or not they had have ever heard of some of the illicit drugs that were listed in the survey. But I wanted you to have a small experience of what students encounter in their schools with surveying. So with that, we're going to go ahead and begin our hearing on House Bill number 2513. I would invite our reviser to provide us an overview.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, committee. So House Bill 2513 would revise the requirements for the administration of tests like these, certain tests, questionnaires, surveys, and examinations in schools. And I'll start with what the law currently provides. In current law, KSA 726316 prohibits the administration of these types of tests, surveys, and questionnaires if they contain questions regarding beliefs or practices on issues such as sex, family life, morality, or religion, unless the school provides prior written notification of the administration of this item, and then also obtains written permission from the parent or guardian of the student to participate. Current law provides an exception for school counselors by authorizing school counselors to administer tests and forms as part of their counseling services. Information obtained through these counseling services under current law is prohibited from being stored on any personal mobile device that is not owned by the school. So what the bill would do is it would amend this law to provide additional requirements for the administration of these tests, surveys, and examinations. So it would revise the application of the statute so that it would apply to any test, questionnaire, survey, or examination that contains questions about the personal and private attitudes, values, beliefs, or practices of the student or any of the student's family, friends, or peers. So prior to the administration of any such test, questionnaire, survey, or examination, the bill would require the school to provide prior written notification to the parent or guardian no more than 4 months in advance of the administration of that item. The written parental notification would be required to include the following information. And every time I say parent, I also mean or guardian of the student from here on out. This notification would be required to provide a copy of the test or the survey, questionnaire, information on how the parent may provide written consent for the student to participate, the name of the company that produces or provides that item, an explanation of the purposes of the data that's collected, how the data is used, and whether the data will remain private or reported later as aggregate data, an explanation of how the test, questionnaire, survey, or examination benefits student learning and academic achievement, and finally, whether the school will receive or maintain the resulting data and how the school will use it. The bill would provide that a parent's written consent could only be accepted by a school after that parent has received that 4-month notification and had an opportunity to review it. The parent would have to provide written consent for each test, survey, questionnaire in order for the student to participate. If a parent provides that written consent, there's a provision in the bill that still authorizes the student to refuse to take that test, questionnaire, survey, or exam and not suffer any adverse consequences for that student's refusal. The bill would require each school to post and maintain copies of these items that are administered in the school, and copies would be required to be posted on the school district website and then updated as necessary. The bill also provides that none of these items can be incorporated or embedded into any academic program, course, or curriculum that's offered or provided by a school district. And then additionally, the bill would prohibit the collection of any personally identifiable student data on these types of items. And then finally, the bill would remove that school counselor exception so that the requirements of the bill would apply now to counseling services. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Nick. With questions for the revisor, we have Representative Hubert, Representative Byers, and then Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nick, could you refresh my memory? What are the differences from the bill that we had hearings on and kicked out of my committee last year, and I think the year before? I think Linda could probably talk to that, but I thought you might be able to just to say, you know, if there's any major changes from this bill to what was kicked out of my committee.
I think the bill in your committee, it required parental consent and added some additional requirements. This bill has a few more requirements added to it, I think.
Thank you.
A good description now, and
I'm sure we'll get some testimony too on that too, so thank you.
Representative Byers.
Nick, if, seeing how this is written, it says specifically school counselors, would that also expand out into school psychologists or the mental health individuals we have now placed in the buildings, or is it specifically just relegated to school counselors?
Yeah, so the provision in current law states that it shall not prohibit school counselors from providing counseling services and administering tests or forms to students with those counseling services. So I would say right now it's specific to school counseling and counseling services.
Madam Chair, can I do one more question? And the next question would be, if a student is in crisis, does this then prevent any type of mental health professional from authoring any type of study, substance, test to determine what's going on with the student who's in crisis without first contacting the parents?
An evaluation would have to be made whether it's a test, questionnaire, survey, or examination containing any questions about the student's values, personal and private attitudes, values, beliefs, and practices. So conducted in the school setting. So if it meets that criteria, I would say the provisions of this bill would apply.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have one example of the survey that we just looked at that it helps identify key mental health indicators such as depression and suicide risk. Johnson County Mental Health also offers at no cost to the district alcohol, EDU, or mental wellness basics. And so can you go in a little further of how this bill would impact, based on the language here, the ability to administer those important tests for indicators?
And I get what you're saying, but I don't know that as a reviser, I'm the one to be speaking on the impact. I think that would be left to the conferees that are either proponents, opponents, or neutral to it. So I would leave any impact and the impacts of what the bill does to the conferees.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for Nick relating to the bill? All right, committee, I would bring your attention to the fiscal note. The fiscal note was provided by Adam Profit, and there was no fiscal impact. Committee, we are going to go ahead and move to the proponent section of our hearing, and I'll be opening that. I would ask our conferees to keep your time to 5 to 7 minutes so that we can get through 5 oral conferees. We also have written as well testimony that you can refer to. And what we will do is, committee, if you have questions for one particular person, please just write that down on their testimony if you have it, or on a piece of paper, and we will do all questions at the end. So we'll first invite Linda Highland. Welcome, Linda.
Chairman Williams, committee members, I thank you so much for this opportunity to be with you, and I honor you for your service to the state of Kansas. The Kansas Department of Education was the first in the nation to fully adopt a comprehensive K-12 curriculum on April of 2012 for SEL. It was revised in 2018. Education decision makers now look toward probing students' psyches rather than instilling academic knowledge. SEL has become really a hot topic in American public education, and increasingly, the school day is concerned with online data collection, surveys, and behavioral questioning to fulfill 80 to 85% of the school day spent on SEL, as reported by the Commissioner of Education and school board members. You heard that right. Academics is only 15 to 20% of the school day. You have seen the wheel referred to today, and I would ask you to really look for academic study in this wheel. In 1995, a publication called Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ was written by Dan Goleman. It triggered a wave of belief among businesses and educators that only 20% of IQ factors determine life success, while 80% of success comes from emotional intelligence. Numerous psychologists and psychiatrists dispute his conclusion and even the term EQ. However, this may be from where the focus of 80% of the school day on SEL has arrived. Well, let's look back a little. In 1994 brought a dramatic shift in public education. It was that year that the term social emotional learning was coined at a meeting hosted by the Fetzer Institute. That same year, President Clinton signed Goals 2000 Education American Act into law. This push for outcomes-based education, OBE, implemented by Goals 2000, changed the focus away from a broad academic foundation, but instead towards state-directed outcomes for the child. With it, state curriculum standards and standardized tests circumvented local school district control. Workforce development education began training workers for a national managed economy with the passage of the Federal School to Work Act and the Workforce Investment Act. Although KSB voted to not bring workforce development to Kansas schools, then Governor Bill Graves signed an executive order to do just that. Goals 2000 was reauthored under President Bush's No Child Left Behind, with heavy-handed federal intrusion and mental health grants. Next came President Obama's Race to the Top Common Core curriculum. A memorandum of agreement was signed by then-Governor Mark Parkinson to bring Common Core into Kansas schools without authorization from the Kansas Legislature for the increased funding to do so. Schools are now under Every Student Succeed Act. SEL has been key throughout all of these federal programs in education. Also established in 1994 was CASEL, C-A-S-E-L, originally named the Collaborative to Advance Social Emotional Learning. OBE, the Communities That Care organization that is in charge of the test you just took, and CASEL all came about in 1994. One created the problem, another possibly the solution, I would assume. What is the return on investment of SEL curriculum? Well, as was referred to earlier, a meta-analysis research study by Durlock and colleagues is commonly used, claiming an 11% gain in achievement for every dollar spent. Contrary studies have been ignored by CASEL and other SEL proponents, and apparently our own state. Shouldn't the legislature ask, what is the return on investment of SEL curriculum to Kansas students, parents, and taxpayers? We hear that KSB surveyed businesses about the kind of student they wish the schools to produce. The leading questions asked seem to give KSB the go-ahead to change the school day to be SEL dominated. Because education is now workforce development driven, it would seem appropriate to blame business for this experimental SEL redirection in Kansas education. While businesses really want a well-educated student, achievement scores are falling drastically, all the while our schools are fully funding, spending approximately $18,000 a year per child. Millions and millions are being spent on SEL classroom work. You heard that yesterday. Only one survey, $1 million for one district. Well, it looks like my time is dwindling here, and I have so much more to say. For example, 18% of Kansas school children are thinking about committing suicide. I hope you take that part of the test where you will read, let me move to that, these questions. During the past 12 months, did you ever feel so sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks or more in a row that you stopped doing some usual activities? Have you ever seriously thought about killing yourself? Have you ever made a plan about how you'd kill yourself? Have you ever tried to kill yourself? Ridiculous. Why are we doing this to students? I will move to the very end. I hope everyone reads all of my testimony. So, questions must be asked by the legislature and taxpaying public. Should the focus of Kansas education be to create a compliant worker, socially engineered through the SEL curriculum? Or should the focus of Kansas education be upon the well-being of our youth and pursuit of excellence in each student's academic strengths? I ask you a whole bunch of questions there that the legislators need to answer. So, Kansas was the first state to do SEL. I want us to be the first to exit it. And I ask for your support on this legislation. Parents have a right to read all of this. And I will close with these sentences to parents who may be listening. Parental oversight is needed to correct this ominous trend. Are you parents and grandparents willing to allow your children to be used as test subjects in poorly designed and non-validated pseudoscience studies? Time has come for this socially engineered SEL experiment to come to an end. Today, I call upon parents and guardians to act and require transparency from your schools. Let your child's school know in writing that all behavioral data collection and SEL curriculum may not be used with your precious child. Now is the time for parents in charge of their students' education. I want to refer to a few documents so the public knows additional things that I have compiled. One is a list of all of the tests and surveys. Some of these teachers are not allowed to see, nor are parents. And we have 18 only in the one SEL specific curriculum. I want you to look.
Linda, I think they're all online. Are they,
They're
Holly?
online?
Yes, and so
Okay.
I would encourage people to go to our committee website and to find the resources that you put together for our committee. And if they have trouble finding
Data security report by the commissioner is important to you read that letter also.
Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity. It's been a long time that I've wanted to say these.
All right, thank you very much, Linda, for providing our committee so much information on this subject. We are now going to Lisa Hoosier. She's a private citizen. Welcome. And reminder to committee, we do have, hopefully you have the emails of each of the testimonies.
Thank you. I'm here to speak in support of HB 2513. I'm not going to go through my original testimony plan due to time limitations. Since the Student Data Privacy Act was passed in 2014, I've testified in each of the last 6 years since when non-parent interests and stakeholders, such as the Chamber of Commerce and business interests that you were referred to before, have attempted to diminish or block parents' fundamental authority in regard to their own children. These testimonies are available from past years, or I can provide them to you. I know the information I am giving you because I have had kids in Kansas schools since 1997. As you can see from my testimony, there has been an all-out attack on true education to transform it from the acquisition of academic knowledge, as the average person would understand it, to an outcomes-based system that attempts to nudge and mold people into desired outcomes. And the outcome has been a type of desired human being with particularly desired values, attitudes, and beliefs, exhibiting desired behaviors. How are desired outcomes defined? It's been decades in the making, as most notably documented in The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America by Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt, from which one excerpt was included in my testimony. It became strongest in 2015 when Congress passed the Every Student Succeeds Act, whereby they grew federal control and mandated federal testing of students' psychological attributes. Among other things, the word family was redefined to extend beyond parents to all the people who play a role in a child's life. Teachers became therapists, students became patients. Data, subjective at best, on every possible aspect of a student would be collected and used in an effort to mold him for success. In my testimony, I provided examples from numerous documents, including Parents as Teachers. That program, unknown to parents with young children, is gathering data on them that's included in a state database. And this is a data file that has some of those data points in it. Kansas Department of Education has no problem viewing parents and their children as the focus of partnerships between government and other stakeholders. The state's School Mental Health Council extends its designs beyond kids to include parents, which you see in the diagram at the bottom of page 1 of my testimony. The survey, the Kansas Community That Care Survey, is also one of the recommendations out of this advisory council report to align with the Attorney General's Youth Suicide Prevention Task Force. I provided information of the role and lack of parent authority regarding social emotional learning by my then school superintendent of the time, who, when I asked how I could opt my son out of social emotional learning when they made their big announcement, said, well, it's integrated in the curriculum, therefore it would be highly unlikely to be able to opt out of it. And it's the majority of the curriculum. That is an exact quote from him. I provided the building of a massive statewide longitudinal database to track every person from cradle to grave. If you haven't taken the time to look at it, I have documents about the federal funding and Kansas Department of Education presentation on it itself. Children are assigned a state ID in Kansas. So if all of this is happening locally and being measured locally, what is being accumulated in the state ID assigned to children in Kansas? The Kansas Department, we also have the social emotional character development standards, and we have the Department of Education's presentations, which I was pleased to see were included. It's actually kind of amazing to me that we are boasting that the business community is deciding what's important to my child's education, and that the business community actually thinks that my child only needs 15% of the Kansas Department of Education document in regard to social emotional learning. And this bottom tier says that all kids in Kansas will be assessed for their mental health. All kids. I also have documents from our local school district. This is from the elementary school counselors, where they actually have documented about changing the neural pathways of the brain. Schools that have aggressively and overwhelmingly moved to technology in every classroom with devices given to every child and every child monitored 24/7, including over the summer. One system called Canvas boasts of the millions of rows of usage data, capturing everything the student does, and all of its predictive analytics. And we have the NAEP, often referred to as a measure of academic achievement. It gauges kids' attitudes and values. Considerable concerns exist as to the impact of technology and outcomes-based education on the development of kids' brains, their abilities to know truths, discern right from wrong, know God, and how it affects increases in depression, anxiety, suicide ideation, and completion. I refer you to my testimony for the specific information on those. We all know what we have observed in regard to kids over the last 2 decades in regard to suicide, depression, and anxiety. There's much more documentation as to why and how education has transformed 180 degrees away from academics, but time doesn't allow for that at this meeting. Are we satisfied with schools being transformed into clinics whose purpose is to provide individualized psychosocial treatment? Is there any room for an education that does not require the use of technology and the constant data mining and tracking of students? Is there any consideration as to kids that are being harmed by social emotional learning or technology-based education? The U.S. Supreme Court recognizes that the Liberty Clause of the 14th Amendment guarantees the fundamental right of parents to direct the education and upbringing of their children. Kansas passed a Parental Rights Act stating that parents shall retain the fundamental right to exercise primary control over the care and upbringing of their children. Those things need to stand. Parent authority, regardless of all the designs of business and the Chamber of Commerce and the U.S. Department of Education, do not erase parental authority. As stated in my testimony, this bill acts to prohibit the infringement of fundamental parental authority, supports transparency, takes a step to prohibit the theft of personal property, and defends the right to individual privacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Next, we have Tiffany Ellison, private citizen.
Good afternoon. Would it be okay if my son stood here with me?
Sure. Would you
have
like to introduce him?
Yeah, this is my son Tayson. He's 14. He's an 8th grader. And these are my 2 boys, Titus and Truman.
Okay, welcome. What school do you go to?
We are homeschooled.
All right, welcome.
This is the school they go to.
Okay,
You're it
excellent. We are happy to have you here today.
So, thank you guys so much for letting me come and speak. I have to tell you, I've spent the last 2 years through the COVID crisis working in social emotional learning within our public school, and these 2 ladies that spoke, I'm going to tell you they're probably better at speaking than I am on this subject. So I'm pleased to be able to be here. So keeping in mind that subjective competencies that we're talking about, like social emotional learning, character and personality development, these aren't quantified competencies. And in light of that, I really urge you to consider voting in favor of this amendment to make a strong statement that Kansas supports teachers in the classroom and the partnership between schools and parents. So not only have I spent ample time in private and public classrooms the last 20 years, I am also a mother of 4. My oldest is in college. She's not here today. As well, I've served as a mental health support provider in a local public school through a partnership with the community mental health provider. My degree and background are actually in health and human performance. And for 20 plus years, I've educated and supported youth and adults alike in understanding and taking control of their own personal health choices, physical and emotional, as well as spiritual. And as is noted, it doesn't take much. I mean, we can throw study after study. We know that our kids are suffering. They're suffering more now. We provide more services now through this process of social emotional learning the last 25 years than we did 25 years ago. So we just can't deny that. And that trend continues to increase. I was also raised the child of a professional educator. My mom is a retired business education professor, having served as the president of the National Business Educators Association, spending a better part of 30 years traveling around our country educating young people as well as the nation's top educators. My great-grandfather was actually State Board of Education president for a time, and many others in my family serve as teachers in a plethora of pedagogies and roles within education. I mention all of this so that you will understand my commitment to public education and to the social and emotional well-being of young people and their families. You may even find it odd that I am here to speak in favor of this amendment that places the priority of parents above that of the system, since that is the direction we see advocates of public education taking our country right now. I personally believe that together we can do more. That's how I was raised. Together we can do more, but I was also raised to believe you cannot legislate morality, and that's what we're doing in public education. I also believe in ensuring parent partnership because that actually benefits the administering teachers and staff as well as the students. Parents continue to feel inept. In my work the last 2 years, I've seen this. They continue to feel inept and obliged to just do whatever the experts say. We're not gathering parent input and parent buy-in, and this is killing our system. I have been an outspoken advocate for informed parental consent for many years, including through the last few years of the COVID crisis. And to the bane of many in my own district where I currently live, I spoke publicly last year against pictures of minor athletes and students being taken and stored on the personal devices of teachers and coaches for the express purpose of contact tracing without the informed consent of parents. And I worked diligently to invoke changes to board-approved policies that would ensure the safety of all students' privacy at school. When pressed on the issue of student data being stored on a teacher's personal cell phone, I was told, legal says it's okay. I was also told that in the technology age, there is no assumed privacy. Students don't have privacy at school, and parents shouldn't assume that they do. This came from outside of our school district, by the way. What they meant was they had spoken with KASB attorneys who told them that they had protection from any legal trouble. Student safety was placed far, far down on the list of importance. The administrators nor the school board members were interested at all in how this affected my daughter or other students. The well-being of minors in their care was second fiddle to their legal cover. This actually told me they knew that what they were doing was wrong. Otherwise, they wouldn't have consulted their legal team. And they wouldn't have attempted to subvert the issue. They would have taken care of it with me, the parent. My concerns as a parent were completely overshadowed by legal says it's okay. So prior to COVID, I publicly expressed my concern as an educator about the damage being caused by anti-bullying campaigns in public education. I believe that what we focus on, we get more of. If we're only focusing on the bully, do the math. As a society, we quickly began to see the effects of forcing kids to view every undesirable behavior as an offense and an act of bullying, instead of as an opportunity to foster self-control, confident boundary setting, and healthy relationship skills, thus creating millions of little bully police focused on the extrinsic world with less and less personal accountability. These were, of course, targeted efforts to draw attention to the poor behavior of a few, magnify it, and treat everyone as if we're all being bullied. The end result was actually creating a larger problem in the name of a solution. What we're doing now is the exact same thing with SEL. Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. I'm never going to get through this. We are globalizing the plight of a few and foisting them upon young children in schools to normalize a problem for the sake of eradicating it. It didn't work with the anti-bully campaigns, and it's not working now. Proponents of SEL use the data of increased teenage mental illness, suicide, and current and projected need for intervention services as a means for funneling more endless services while they make money off of the crisis. They do not acknowledge that the increased devastating data on childhood mental illness is largely caused by the method of intervention itself. In fact, I will tell you, children often don't even answer the questions honestly, especially as they get older. They just don't. They don't see the importance of it. And so they answer in funny ways, in ways that protect them from having to actually deal with a problem, because when they're answering questions on a screen, that's not the same as having meaningful human interaction. Was that my 5 minutes?
You can go over 30 seconds. We have no opponents for this bill.
Okay.
So you can kind of give yourself a closure.
Okay, a closure. Okay,
Committee, because our
I get it.
Yeah, our proponents they have, their testimony is longer. It is provided for them, so I encourage everybody to read it. So just yeah, you're doing great.
Okay. So I guess I'll finish with this. When I was asked about my feelings about SEL and kids in classrooms, and as it relates to this amendment that would just force more and invite more parental involvement, I said, I'm really trying hard to understand the need for an amendment such as this one, as informed parental consent should be a given, embraced by every member of an intelligent and morally astute society. That any rational person would argue against it, and that any lawmaker would not see the benefit in ensuring the role of parents and caregivers in the lives of their children is to deny reality. Why we would not want informed parental consent is a quandary to me. As the founders of this country and the penning of its guiding contract between the citizens and government so aptly observed, the truth is self-evident. And so should be the importance of preserving the relationship between children and their parents. I'll end with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Tiffany, and thank you for standing by your mom. Awesome. Okay, next we have Phyllis Sachel, and she is with us here. There she is, Phyllis. Welcome.
Thank you. Get my glasses on. Chairman Williams and committee, thank you for your time and thank you for your commitment to the state and to the families of Kansas. I'm Phyllis Sachel from Topeka. I'm representing Culture Shield Network and myself. We're proponents of HB 2513. Should parents have the right to know what their students are being taught or surveyed about in schools? All of them, leaving nothing out. Culture Shield Network believes so. As a Kansas pro-family organization that has existed for over 10 years, we represent thousands of Kansans. We citizens and parents, when they've heard what's on these invasive surveys, they've lost trust in the system. Hundreds have now left public education and many more are considering it. Unless parents have access to curriculum, surveys, activities of the children in schools, trust will continue to decline. Much has the appearance of indoctrination as opposed to academics. The surveys are leading students. Most parents and taxpayers want and expect the basics of reading, good literature, mathematics, history and sciences that are accurate, and the acquiring of great understanding and communication of the English language. We're aware of many parents who opt out of these surveys. However, we believe many more, given the opportunity to opt in, would take that opportunity. We will continue to expose these surveys on radio and by other communications. Our desire that instead of Kansas being the first state in 1994 to begin SEL, that Kansas would be known as a state where the basics are being taught, our children would excel in academics that are important to life. Leave the social and emotional welfare to the parents, churches, and families. Parents and guardians should have the right to read and approve whether to administer these very personal and potentially destructive lines of questioning before it can be administered to their children. It's an outrage to learn the nature of the questions. All the while, academic scores decline. Now, this is important. Again, we want to look at the numbers and what is going on during all of this. Are the millions spent on SEL to collect behavioral data on Kansas students improving academic learning? Kansas Department of Education numbers say no. Shouldn't the focus of Kansas education be on the well-being of our youth and the pursuit of excellence for each student's academic strengths? They're not all cookie cutters. They all have independent and interests and capabilities. And so what kind of data files and how many files are schools accumulating on students? It would be nice to have a list so that we know how many there are and what they are. Are businesses and NGOs collecting and storing data? Who has access to these to this data? Is this data being sold? Isn't this data collection, including the academic record collection of the student, data of their own private intellectual property? This is their own private intellectual property. Isn't this a violation of the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution, which has been referred to? Should this be grounds for lawsuits? When you think about that, who should own these personal records? How many schools received permission from parents to collect data on their children? There are many questions that need answers, and many have been brought up today. Social emotional learning, behavioral surveys, and data collecting promote dangerous lifestyles, drug and alcohol usage, violate the student's right to privacy and parental and guardian constitutional rights, as well as a detriment to academic learning and achievement, with so much focus on this and not enough focus on academics. Please defend our Kansas students from the social emotional learning and growing data collection invasion of their private lives. HB 2513 will give parents the essential information they need. It should be law that every parent and guardian has access to any and all curriculum that is being taught or used. Only then can they make an informed decision before opting in to allow SEL behavioral data collection on their student. I ask you for your support to vote this House Bill 2513 out of committee favorably. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Phyllis, for your testimony. Next, we have Dr. Walt Chappell, President of Educational Management Consultants, and he is on WebEx. Walt, are you with us?
I am, thank you.
Welcome, Walt. You have 5 to 7 minutes to share.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. It's wonderful to be with you and to have an opportunity to speak to this extremely important bill. In fact, I want to start by complimenting the committee and you for bringing this forward so quickly in the session. One of the reasons, as I point out in my written testimony, is that many of these questionnaires are given towards the latter part of the school year, which means March, April, May. And if parents have never had a chance to see this information, what their child is being asked to respond to becomes extremely difficult for the parents to have any idea what their child is going through and the trauma it creates not only for the child, but then for the family once they find out what is actually being requested of them. So this bill is extremely important. As I mentioned in my written testimony, we had back in 2014 over 200 people show up in a committee room just about like yours. You're on the 5th floor, that was on the 1st floor. And as you can imagine this, the room was packed. We had folks clear out into the rotunda. There were chairs set up so they would have a chance to hopefully listen to the testimony. But it took us a long time to try to get the state legislature to take action. This is a festering wound that has been growing on for a long time. When I served on the State Board of Education, one of the things I was most concerned about was the KIDS system. Now, several of your conferees have mentioned the Kansas individual data on students. That starts in kindergarten all the way through the 23 years of a person's life. The federal government, through the Department of Education, is asking our schools to provide data through K-12, and then they want to track that student into college and any courses or classes that they might take in post-secondary. And I asked the basic question, whose business is this anyway? Why is it that the federal government or the state would ever want to track somebody that far into their life and so much personal information? It's absolutely appalling to me, and I think it is to you as well. So there's an urgency today to take action and make sure this amendment to the statutes gets done. We passed the bill in 2014 and thought it was going to work. But instead, many of the school districts are providing a packet of information at the time of enrollment to say, sign here. So when the parent signs, they're supposedly giving their consent to whatever the school comes up with through the rest of the school year. Now, that's certainly not informed consent. This is the major part of this bill, is making sure that parents have an opportunity to see what's being asked of their child, and then, of course, to be able to opt in, make sure they have an informed decision they're making before their child is ever subjected to these kinds of questionnaires. Now, many of you know I have my doctorate from Michigan State University in instructional development, and I've developed many questionnaires and research documents over the years. Now, I have to say that these questionnaires many times are not valid at all, as several of your parents have already reported. The kids don't have any incentive at all to respond correctly to their own feelings. They can make up whatever they want. There's no effort on the part of the quote researchers to go back and validate if their answers were anywhere close to accurate. So if you start out with data that is flawed to begin with, there's no way this makes any sense to try to use for decisions later. When I served on the state board, I found that repeatedly, the effort was not necessarily to just gather the data, but to make sure they had something they could show in the next grant application, that they had actually administered the test. And oh my God, look at all these kids that are committing suicide or thinking about suicide, or shouldn't we do something more to help them? So they end up hiring more staff, developing more tests, and going out and trying to supposedly do something. In fact, very few of the kids actually benefit. Now, you see that in the data that you shared at the start of this meeting, Chairman. I'm just very impressed that you brought it forward. We're not making a dent at all in the problems that we have, and the social emotional questionnaires that are being offered have very little to do with helping these students through any crisis they may have. Now, before I conclude my testimony, I want to go back to the school counselors. I think that is one section of this bill and the statute that's currently in front of you that you should keep. School counselors need some way to try to identify what's going on with a child. If they're in crisis, sometimes they will actually open up to that counselor when they won't to a parent or they won't to a grandparent. They'll actually develop a relationship with that counselor in a way that's very constructive. So I don't think we should tie their hands. There are many instruments that the counselors have that they can use that are validated and will be very helpful to that child to be able to get through the crisis without having to go through a lot of additional trauma in their life. So that's the only change I would make to this bill. I would keep that language in that's currently in the statute, but go ahead and get this out of committee and onto the House floor and passed so it can get to the Senate as quickly as possible. I thank you for your time. We'll stand for questions as you have them. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. This is Dr. Chappell. Committee, now you have an opportunity to direct your questions to any one of the conferees that are here for the proponent portion of our hearing. Just please state who you would like to direct your question to. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I see that we have some members who are in here that aren't conferees today. I would like to ask them questions. I'll probably attack that offline. I'm disgusted by what I've heard here today. As a parent of 4 kids, which I homeschool and send to private school myself, I understand exactly what you're saying. As I sat here and looked through what children in Kansas are put through, and this is the nice version, I suppose, because we're professional up here in the State House, turns my stomach. Shame on you if you're a proponent of this. It's disgusting. And to leverage children and their psyches in order to line your pockets and pull down grant funds, as we've heard from conferees, disgusting. I say it. I stand by it. And I'm looking you in the eye as I say it. Here's my question that I have. And this will be a question for Ms. Linda Highland, please. As Dr. Chappell was, and thank you all for your testimony, Dr. Chappell was discussing just now, at the end of his testimony, he wrapped up by saying he would go against taking out the part of the school counselors. I think his quote was, it was tying of the counselors' hands. I think I saw some reaction from you. Could you explain exactly why you would not be in favor of that?
I certainly would want, thank you for the question, I would certainly want counselors involved with the student in crisis. I don't want a counselor giving more surveys to the child who's in crisis. And I could also answer that question by telling you a story that, or something that happened to me here in Topeka when our children were in grade school here. And the principal, I would go into the school and I was the picture lady and we'd talk about artwork. And loved the kids, loved the opportunity. I've always been involved with schools. And the principal had a student there This was before the time of the label of bullies. So there was a student there who really was the school bully, but he sensed that he had talent in art. So he asked me if I would spend time with the student during the day. We would be in the hallway and we just work together, and I was just to bring this out in him, and I was told to be prepared for a bad situation, that I didn't know what I would be facing. Well, this student called me Mrs. Highland. His art was beautiful. I entered it in contest. Other students wanted that personal attention. Students want relationships. Students want models. Students don't want to be in front of a paper taking tests in a computer all day long. Not all day long, but I guess for some it is. Just doing question about question. You're turning with SEL, you're turning the student inward, not outward, to all the opportunities in this world, to all the opportunities they can have in their future. And so, yes, I want counselors, but I don't want a situation like what you heard yesterday of a student being pulled out of class, intervention being done based upon a survey. That is not education in Kansas. That is not what I, as a taxpayer, am paying for. And
it's more of a comment than it is a question, I suppose. You say that that's not the education that you're paying for here in Kansas. I was reading through this thing, and since KSD and the Department of Education with their longitudinal achievement test scores say that we can't get above third grade reading level, it was kind of hard to think that kids can read through these things because it's way above a third grade reading level. Is this the type of stuff that we should be putting in front of our kids for that Kansas education? Should parents have a say-so in that? Is this the type of stuff that we should be putting in front of them?
I saw this survey many years ago, and that is what led me on this journey. How is this happening? I've just been doing a lot of research, and it just keeps building. Where is this coming from? And I think it was a big moment for me when I realized how it all converged in 1994. All these people, I believe, knew one another. There's been a plan here. And I just want to see education return to be about the student and their strengths.
Representative Estes.
Mrs. Highland, if you'll stay at the mic, could you please cite for me where you got your statistics that 15 to 20% of the academic day?
That comes from the Kansas Department of Education.
Can you get more specific for me, though? What report did you find that in? Where did you
Well,
find
it was the report that Lisa showed you in her slide.
Randy Watson's presentation?
Right. Commissioner.
Okay.
And also my personal state school board member has stated that.
Thank you very much.
Other questions from committee? Yes, Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Does anybody know how many tests we're talking about? How many surveys or questionnaires this bill would impact?
Would you like to direct your question to someone?
No.
Or it's in general?
If anybody's got an idea.
I think Representative Highland, not your husband, sorry, apologies. I think Linda, she did provide a list of 20 that are on KSDE's website, and that is in her testimony.
And would those 20 all be in one district?
And she may take the stand.
That is from the Department of Education's website, measuring social emotional growth locally. So that's a 182-page document on the website. So I read through that and then pulled out all the mentioning of different surveys and questionnaires. So, for example, 3 of them are done to measure KTC KCTC survey is only one, and then there's a survey on parents and a survey from the CDC, and those are used together to do a report. I'm also heard from a legislator that when Kansas Communities That Cares does their surveying of schools, the reports that they give back to the district are, they're a long time coming. It takes a while to get them there. So I just took it directly from the website. And that's just for the social emotional learning curriculum.
And the three that you just mentioned they use them together, according to 2513, that would have to be 3 different permission slips the school district would have to provide to the parent.
I know this won't be easy, but I don't know any other way for parents to be informed, because right now, parents are not seeing this. And if a parent really wants it done, then fine, but I just feel that parents have the right to see these materials.
I am a parent. I have kids in school currently, and we are provided an opportunity to see it. The school district's required since the 2014 law.
You get to see all of the behavioral testing surveys?
Our school district was in here yesterday, and he said we could see anything.
I don't think that that's provided publicly. You can make that request as a parent, but I don't think that there's no requirement in law. So.
I only ask this because I go back to the fiscal note, and that the fiscal note says the agency notes there would be additional administrative costs for local school districts, but these additional costs cannot be estimated. So I'm just looking at it from an administrative perspective.
Well, I believe, to answer that there is a lot of money in SEL. Maybe partly why we're doing this. And so I think this is a cost benefit to the state for some of this not to be required of districts. And I don't believe every school district does all of those 19 in the social emotional learning curriculum. Some very small districts would not be able to pay $1 million for that one survey that you heard about yesterday, that one program. So, but across the state, we just need to know what's going on with this. It's been long enough.
Any further questions, committee? I'd like to ask, okay, Representative Byers, and then I will close with a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To any of our conferees today, have you seen the parental sign-off form for the Kansas Communities That Care survey, where it specifically states that it's completely anonymous, participation is voluntary? It goes on to explain what it is the survey is going to cover, as well as stating that if a student is uncomfortable with any question, they can skip it, not have to answer it, move on. Anybody?
This was the first time that I actually testified in regard to it, was that survey. We received an email from our school district principal and asked for permission for our child to take it, but provided some summary information, but no link to the survey, and made some statements as to its benefit and the need for it in the community. And, excuse me. And so my husband went out and tried to find a link to the survey, and we did, and was absolutely appalled by the questions that were on the survey. So that begat if we're going to ask parents to grant permission or opt in or say no to something, how are they supposed to be able to do that if they don't even have a link to the survey or a copy of it? So yes, I have had that experience in the school, and it's always highly encouraged to take it, and the kids are not told. My kids were never told, and I had 4, were never told that they had an opportunity to not take it. So that's all I can say about that.
Okay, well, actually, I'm going to be asking you a question, and so then when I do that, after Representative Byers is finished with her questioning, then I'll let you respond. Representative Byers, did you have any more questions?
The only other thing that I had is, as a former educator who's administered the survey a number of times, even in the administrative instructions, it specifically tells the teacher to tell the students that if you're uncomfortable with any question, you can skip it. You do not have to take the survey at all. It also instructs that the teacher has to look through and make sure that there is the parent sign off for every student that they're responsible for when they're administering the survey. But thank you for your answers.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and close with a question. Tiffany, you can come on up, and I'll preference the question and then give you an opportunity to respond to the question that was asked. I want to ask you, well, first, would you like to respond, and then I'll ask you my question?
Yeah, actually, I think that's a great question because I think some districts actually do a better job than others. So I think when we're talking about it, we do have to understand that each district does apply these things a little bit differently. To one point of that, like I think Mr. Chappell mentioned, parents are given like a lengthy thing at the beginning of the enrollment period for school, which is now all online as well. You don't even go in and see who your kid's going to be going to school with. It's just, do you agree? Check, 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 check. It lasts for an hour and a half per kid. And so you're just... right? And so then by the end of the school year, when your kid is taking that test, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. And then also, I know that if you opt your kids out of the things that you can opt your kids out of, you kind of have to ask, would you let me know ahead of time that you're gonna be doing this? Because otherwise my kid's gonna be funneled into a closet by themselves with a book and told to read for the next hour. And that's called punishment. Not because reading is a punishment, but when you're taken out of the room and you're set aside and isolated. So we don't really encourage. What I would love to see personally is that if schools need this data, send it home to parents, have parents and families fill it out together and submit it back to the school. If I were writing it, that's what it would have said. But anyway.
That's a great idea. Okay.
It only seems rational to me.
All right, Tiffany, my question is, you brought your kids with you, you are homeschooling, your oldest daughter sounds like she was in the public school, sounds like you have worked in the public school for 20+ years. So please tell us why you decided to remove your children from public school.
Ooh, loaded question. We can probably go out to coffee after this, mostly because it's cold in here. But as a parent early on, I saw trends in education that did not fit the mold that I was brought up in. And again, that was a very strong background in education. And I spent my entire childhood, I remember sitting in this little brick schoolhouse with my mom teaching, she was teaching keyboarding on a typewriter, and I just thought I could type so fast because I could sit there in class and watch her. But as I started getting involved in education myself, in health education, and my kids started coming into education, I didn't understand what was happening, that my kindergartner would come home and say, I'm the dumbest kid in class. This shouldn't even be an issue. And this is a kid who's not dumb. I mean, no kid is dumb. And so, in asking these questions, I remember asking one of my coworkers who was a principal, I worked in a different building, and I said, I don't understand some of these things that we're doing. Can you help me understand why we're making this shift? And she said, Tiffany, we don't have to teach concepts anymore. We just have to teach kids how to find reliable sources of education or of information. And I looked this beautiful, pleasant woman in the eye across her desk, and I said, you'll have to forgive me if I would prefer my children be the reliable source of information. And that was the first time I took my children out of public school, and I kept them at home, and I said, we can do a better job. In my testimony, you'll see that my son was put into a lower tier reading program. He was taken out of his favorite class, science, and put in a room facing a wall to read by himself for 10 minutes and then read out loud to this teacher that he didn't know for another 5 minutes. And that was supposed to inspire this kid to love to read. I know this because I asked to sit in on it, and I watched it, and that was the last time my son ever went to that reading class. And I said, my son can read. This is kind of silly because I've taught him to read Latin. And so I know that he can read. And in fact, what I did was I bought a salt water fuel cell powered model motorcycle. okay? This is hard for me to say because that's not my field of expertise. I bought him this. That's what he chose, and I gave him the instructions, 77 instructions. And I sat him down at the table, and my 7-year-old son, who couldn't read, sat there for 3 hours and put together a functioning saltwater fuel cell-powered motorcycle for himself. And I took it to the school, and I said, tell me again, he can't read. His own teacher said he should never have been in there, but I didn't have a say. His classroom teacher knew his abilities and did not have a say because of a survey that had been conducted with an outside classroom specialist. He couldn't read. I knew he could read, so I took those steps. My kids are homeschooled because I don't want them to be victims of a system. I didn't want them to be seen as a statistic. I did not want my children to be bullied by adults. And I did not want my children to become bullies. And I was afraid that if I left them in that system as elementary children, that is exactly what was going to happen to them. This from someone who values public education to my very core. That is why my children are here today.
So thank you for providing that reasoning. But now I want to ask about solutions. You're standing here, you gave us one solution that you actually, think that would be a good idea, which is a very interesting idea. What are some other things that this committee should know about public education related to social emotional learning that you think would be either important for us to ask of the schools or to look at making adaptations, if there are any things that occur to you?
The answer I'm going to give you is not going to be popular. With respect to every person that I have ever taught with, we have amazing educators. We have amazing educators who feel like their hands are being tied. We don't teach social emotional skills on paper. We teach social emotional skills every time we interact with a child, and we teach them healthy relationship skills. If you want to impact the social emotional learning of children, you educate the adults. You educate the adults. We're putting the effort and the emphasis on kids because we know that we can collect this data and quantify them. We can't do that to the adults. Nobody's testing the adults on their social emotional skills, when in fact, that's exactly what we should be doing because a child's experiences in a classroom are going to dictate their social emotional development. It's not something that can be extracted, it's who we are. From the second of conception, our social emotional learning is sparked. Literally the moment of conception. I can validate this because my twins, I didn't get to this in my statement, so thank you for asking me. When my twins were born, it was pretty traumatic and they were separated instantly and they were not doing well. Their vitals were terrible. When we put them back together, immediately their vitals went up and they needed 0 medical intervention. And it literally felt like the cosmos was smiling. Like we put these kids together and you could feel it in the room. It was palpable. It was incredible. So then when we got to school, you know exactly what they wanted to do to my twins, right? Separate classrooms. Because putting them in separate classrooms was going to give them a better academic achievement, right? Nope. Had nothing to do with academics. They said, we want them to develop their own personalities. I said, well, with all due respect, again, that's not why I'm bringing them to you. That's not your job. They are divinely who they are. You don't get a say in that. I just want you to provide them an opportunity to learn math and reading and art and music and all these things that are going to benefit them academically. It's not your job to decide who they will be.
Right.
Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you for your testimony. So, and you may be seated. Committee, as we close this up, we do not have any more proponent testimony except for what is written. So please take a moment and look at those names on your list. They are emailed to you so you can read those testimonies at your convenience. There is one written only neutral testimony, and it's from Greenbush Education Service Center, which I actually think we may have a representative from Greenbush today. Is there someone here? Okay, great. And so if you have questions about the administration of that, they are here to answer questions. We do not have opponents at this time for this bill. So I am going to close the hearing on House Bill 2513, and I am going to ask our conferees a little bit of homework. Notice, committee, that their emails, if you would like, their emails are provided on your daily agenda. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to them independently. I would, again, encourage you to read their testimony. But my homework question for you is this: what kind of surveys, meaning what kind of questions, should our committee be asking our schools? Meaning, how much money do you spend on social emotional learning? I'm giving examples. What companies, how do you use your data? How much of it is private? How much is aggregated? How are you measuring it? What are your goals? How much time are your kids spending in each grade level? So my question, I just gave you things that I'm thinking off the top of my head. If we're going to survey our kids repetitively, it's going to be different in different districts, right? And it's going to be different in different grades. So what questions would any one of you ask those schools about their surveys? And if you would like to submit those to Holly, then I'll be happy to share them with the committee, or I would be curious what your response is. Okay, committee. With that, I just want to remind that tomorrow we do have 2 bills that we are going to be hearing, and those bills are House Bill 2512 and House Bill 2514. They aren't particularly long bills. It won't take us very long, and we will be limiting the time to a maximum of 45 minutes each, maximum. So with that, committee, we are adjourned.